Hello. So the verdict is in on the VAT on education court case. If you've been following it, the government were taken to court by a group of claimants who said that adding VAT onto education was in violation of their human rights. The judges have decreed that it is legally acceptable for the government to add VAT onto education. So legally, there is no reason why they shouldn't. However, what they did say, the senior judges in the Divisional Court ruled today that the government's VAT measure discriminated against children with special needs without an EHCp. The judges declared that the VAT measures will have a disproportionately prejudicial effect on this vulnerable cohort of children. So what you'll see in the mainstream media, what you'll see from Labour is we won and we're allowed to do this, and by doing this we're going to put loads of money into XYZ. Now the money was originally slated to go back into education. It was originally slated to go back into the state system, 6,500 teachers, all that jazz. But as the time has gone by, it's been going into lots of other things, and the latest thing that it's going into is the asylum seekers housing. So Keir Starmer said he wanted it to go into affordable housing, and then if the latest report is to be believed, that is in fact asylum seekers houses. So that's where this money is going, if it raises any money. I dare say they'll tell us it's going to fund Sizewell as well, and probably your Christmas list. It feels like the people in the independent sector will be funding practically everything that the government needs from now on. They'll be propping up the NHS single-handed. So if it raises any money, that's where it's going, to housing now. It's not going back into education. So the people that are in state education are quite pissed off, and rightly so, because for the past year they've been saying pay your taxes, pay your extra 20%, you can afford it, we need it. Which is an interesting take on things, because of course there's lots of people in the state system that could perfectly afford to pay a little bit more so that they could help support the system they're actually in, but that was never asked of them. It was just the minority that was asked to pay for it. So there in the state system are of course some schools that are doing brilliantly and some kids that are having an amazing outcome, some not so much, and the SEND system in state is absolutely broken. So what does it look like today? Well, today it looks like 13,000 children are joining the state system. But what we have to remember is there's no money for them. So Bridget Phillipson hasn't allowed any extra money for the kids coming from the independent sector into the state sector. Now, there's so many demands on the state sector budget anyway. And if you have a look at it, the cost of running a school has risen by 3.4%, but Bridget Phillipson has given them 2.2%. So there's already a massive budget deficit. But now they've got 13,000 new kids joining. And if we are to believe the figures that came out in the court case by the Treasury, by the government, whoever believes their own figures, but this doesn't go in their favour, because if we do believe that, 54,000 children will be joining the state sector over the next 2 years, but there will be no extra funding for them. So that's a brilliant start. So if you're in the state system, you are rightfully irritated that the money that you were promised hasn't materialised because it's gone to house some asylum seekers, and of course your children will be joined by 54,000 new children from the independent sector, because even though Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves were told that it would raise no money because people didn't have that money, because they didn't have broad shoulders and they hadn't spaffed it all on AstroTurf, they were actually skint just trying to do the right thing for their own kids. Even though they were warned that, they didn't listen, so they went ahead with it. So now what we've got is a system in the independent sector that is completely broken. Now, we were warned, we knew, blah, 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 blah. Where do we go with this? Well, that's down to the people that are in the state sector. That's down to what they want to do with it. Because remember, the people like me in the independent sector that were opposing VAT on education, we were called private school lobbyists. Bridget didn't like us because we came from the independent sector, which she doesn't like anyway, and we argued against her policies. So we were private school lobbyists, scum of the earth, that kind of thing. So a lot of them are now going to be in the state sector. So what's she going to call them then? Because she likes the state sector, remember. That's the 94%, soon to be 97%. She loves them. She thinks they're great. So when those people start complaining that little Jimmy's got a breakfast, but little Alex doesn't have a chemistry teacher, what are we going to do then? How are we arguing that? Because we can't blame it on the independent sector anymore, because that's been obliterated. That's gone. So whose fault is it anyway? And it can't be Donald Trump's fault, because he's in America and even he couldn't have done this. And if it was the Tories' fault, which it wasn't, because we know that the Tories put more money into education every year than Bridget Phillipson has done, that was 14 years ago. And whilst we can absolutely accept that the Labour Party didn't learn anything in those 14 years, they're still blaming the Tories for everything. But it can't be their fault, because we're a year on and this is a direct result of the VAT on education that Labour imposed. So who are we going to listen to? Whose fault is it now? And this is where it gets interesting, because Bridget has no backstop anymore. Now she's opened herself to a whole society who have just learned from judges that this ruling adversely affects children with special educational needs. Senior judges in the Divisional Court ruled that the government's VAT measures discriminated against children with special educational needs. Now, if a judge has ruled that this government is discriminatory against vulnerable children, that doesn't look good, does it? It doesn't look like you care. It doesn't look like you want the best outcomes for people. When you're talking about breaking down barriers and a judge has said that you've just built a massive whopping barrier, that's not so great, is it? So effectively, whilst the government may well be in the Westminster Bar drinking their subsidised champagne, celebrating the win on special needs children, which, as I've said, if that floats your boat, you pop that cork, you go for it. They may be celebrating that legal win where they're legally allowed to add VAT onto education. One wonders if there will be anyone holding up the bar thinking, hang on, this isn't right. Kids with special educational needs are being penalised by our government. We are destroying the educational outcomes of children by our policies. It's been ruled today that it's discriminatory and it's hurting the most vulnerable in society. I'm not sure I can drink to that. I hope there is. I hope there is a Labour MP that leans against the bar and thinks that today, because you will be the only one in that party with a conscience, integrity, empathy and a moral conduct. And if you are that Labour MP, now is your turn to start doing something about this, because over the next 4 years, if we see this consistent dehumanisation of the vulnerable in society, we are going to end this Parliament in a very, very sorry state.